Hi, I'm Mrs. Jardine, and I am going to go over chains and food webs and energy flow today. So, obviously, you guys should all know that the main source of energy for life on Earth is sunlight, because without sunlight, we wouldn't be able to have plants. So, autotrophs and producers basically mean the same thing. They are to use energy from the sun. So photosynthetic autotrophs use energy from the sun. So photosynthetic means gets their energy from light, meaning the sun. And then their autotrophs, the prefix auto means to do it on itself. So an autotroph means to make its own food. You have something called chemosynthetic autotrophs. Chem means chemicals. Synthesis means to make. So chemosynthetic autotrophs make their own food from chemicals. So that would be like bacteria that live at the bottom of hydrothermal vents in the ocean, or like bacteria that live in like the hot springs in Yellowstone. They get their energy, make their own food from chemicals that they're around. But what we're going to talk about mainly in this chapter is photosynthetic autotrophs, because they make their energy from the sun, and that's what you see every day when you see a plant. All right, heterotrophs are also known as consumers. Heterotrophs are organisms that eat other organisms for food. So you have 5 different types of heterotrophs. You have herbivores. Those eat only plants. So like cows, caterpillars, horses, those are herbivores. You have carnivores. Carnivores, they eat only meat. So that would be like wolves and snakes and owls. They're only eat meat. Then you have omnivores. Omnivores eat plants and animals. So that would be like humans and crows, and a lot of scavengers are omnivores, like raccoons. Detritivores, those feed on plant and animal remains. So a detritivore, they feed on detritus, which is plant and animal remains. Plant and animal remains meaning an example of a detritivore would be like a mite, earthworms, snails. So say you go out into, I don't know, the forest or the bike trail in town, and you pick up a rotting log. Okay, what you would see underneath that rotting log are usually detritivores. So when we go to the bike trail, and we usually take a field trip out there, and we try to find animals in all of these different areas, we'll find a lot of animals underneath there that are feeding on that dead rotting log. So that, which is detritus, those are detritivores. Let's see. Decomposer. So if you have a fridge and you sometimes don't eat all your food in the back of your fridge, it might start to mold. Those are decomposers, because bacteria that could break down food, they sometimes molds are decomposers. Actually, they are all the time. Like fungus, when they are decomposers, they break down organic matter. All right. So there's the 5 different types of consumers. All right, a food chain gets its energy, the producer gets its energy from the sun, and then it stops when that animal dies. That animal doesn't decay and then turn into the sun, which starts the food chain, and start all over. It's not a cycle. It starts with energy from the sun, and it stops when that animal dies, or like say a decomposer eats the dead rotting log or whatever. Energy stored by producers can be passed through ecosystem along a series of steps, and that's called the food chain. Food chain starts with producers and stops when the organism dies. So there's several different food chains here, depending on which one you talk about. So there are in the soil are decomposers, so they would eat any dead decomposing organisms. What would start the food chain is the sun, and then you have primary producers. In this situation, would use photosynthesis to get their energy. You have primary consumers. Primary means first. There is only a primary producer. There's not a secondary producer, because a producer has to make its own food. So you can't have a producer eat another producer. It doesn't work. But you do have primary consumers. So that's the first one in the food chain. Primary consumers always eat a plant or a producer. Secondary consumers, they eat a primary consumer, and tertiary eat a secondary. I'll talk about that again later. Right, so this, unlike a food chain, is a food web. Food chains are very good to explain the different things, but in reality, food webs are what takes place in the world. Because if you think about it, do you eat the same thing for every single meal? Probably not. And in nature, they don't eat the same thing for every meal either. So for example, let me show you here, this bald eagle in this food web is eating a duck here and a fish over here. This fish here is getting eaten by this fish and this fish and this fish. So a food web is usually more realistic, and it shows how all the food chains kind of go together. Again, primary producers get their energy from the sun. They're photosynthetic autotrophs. And then you have herbivores that eat those. And you have carnivores that eat the herbivores. All right, an energy pyramid talks about the producers get all of their energy, 100% of the energy from the sun, and then they take it and they use it for other processes and whatnot. But as it goes up the energy period, then it loses it through heat. So for example, primary producer, say this is corn right here, primary producer. And then say this is an insect that eats corn, all right? No, what? It's 100% here and only 10%? What the heck happened? Well, the energy, 10% at every level is lost as heat. Through metabolic processes, they have to hunt their food, they have to run around and get it. Well, if you think about it, on primary consumers, the herbivores, they don't have to hunt their food. They just have to go and eat it, right? Any excessive movement that they're going to have to do has to be from hiding from predators, or, oh, I ate all the grass right here with the corn, and now I have to move over there and go get more corn. So they lose 10% as heat. And then, so if this is corn, this is an insect that eats corn. Now say this is a mouse. Well, that mouse loses 10% more. So this mouse has to eat more food than, say, this insect that eats corn, right? Because it lost 10%. Now this one only gets 1%. And then this snake eats this mouse, and so on and so on. So they usually have to eat more the higher up they are in the food chain. Usually their bodies are bigger too, but they have to eat more because they're getting less energy from the amount of food that they're eating, because so much of it is lost as heat. Okay, so normally I draw this on the whiteboard, but I thought I would type it out so that I wouldn't have so many words on a page. Okay, so you have the sun, right? Sun starts all food chains because the energy is given to the producers, the photosynthetic autotrophs, okay? So here we have this corn, right? All right, so corn is an autotroph, right? We already talked about that. It gets its energy from the sun through photosynthesis. It is a primary producer. Primary producer, it's the only producer too, but they call it primary producer. Gets 100% of the energy from the sun. First thing, right? Second one is the insect. Insect is a heterotroph, right? Because it has to eat something. It is an herbivore because this insect, I just said insect just to make life easier, only eats plants, okay? So it's an herbivore. And then a primary consumer, because it's the first one in the food chain, and it loses 10% of its energy as heat, remember? And so 100% here, 10% here, because it lost energy as heat. All right, next up the food chain, we have this mouse. This mouse ate this insect. Yeah, so good. Okay, it's a heterotroph, right? This mouse, we're going to say, is an omnivore. So it eats that insect, and it also could go and eat the corn, whatever is available. It is a secondary consumer. So this primary, this one's secondary, right? And it lost energy as heat, so only it's 1%. Notice 100% here, 10% here, 1% here. I'm just taking a 0 away. Get it? Taking 10% away. Now we have a snake. The snake ate the mouse, right? Heterotroph, right? Because it's an animal. It's a carnivore. So this snake is only going to eat animals. The tertiary, that means 3. It's a fancy word. I think tertiary is so fancy because if you already use that in real life, you oh, it's the tertiary. Like, who talks like that? No one says that word ever. But here, I say it because that's what it's called. But I've never used that the tertiary in conversation. It's really fun to say. I feel like I should just say it just for fun. What consumer are you today? Are you the tertiary consumer? Because I am. You should do it. It'd be fun. And then it loses 10% as heat again. And then, so this would be a pyramid. If you were to draw this out, it would be in a pyramid. The bottom, the primary producer gets 100% of the energy, and then next up and next up. So then last I put on here is a hawk that eats that snake. Again, heterotroph, because all of these are heterotrophs because they're all animals. Animals are heterotrophs. This is also a carnivore. Hawks are predators, which means they only eat meat. Quaternary, woo, the fancy words. Quaternary consumer means 4. Okay, primary means 1, secondary 2, tertiary 3, quaternary 4. Again, 10% is lost as heat. Metabolism. There you go. So that's your essay question. I'm sure on your test, basically you have to be able to understand all the parts. What type of consumer is it? Is it an herbivore? Only plants. Carnivore? Only meat. Omnivore, both plants and animals. Detritivore eats dead decaying matter. Those would be like earthworms and mites. And decomposer eats organic matter like bacteria and fungus. So you have to be able to classify that. You have to know if it's a producer or heterotroph, what an autotroph is, makes its own food, and how energy works. If you have your whole food chain set out, 100% of energy comes from the sun. Boom! Insect loses 10% as heat, so they get 10%. The mouse, 1%, again, loses some as heat, Snake, 0.1, hawk, 0.01. That's heat. There you go. Any questions on that? All right. And I'm going to talk about 2 more concepts quick. I hit the wrong button. Biomass pyramid. Bio means what again? Life, right? Bio means life. I don't know where to put this. Bio means life, and so mass is an amount. So biomass pyramid is the amount of life in the pyramid. And so in the aquatic ecosystem, for example, versus terrestrial, the grasses make up, if you were to put snakes in a pyramid, right? Say you count how many snakes live in 5 acres, right? You get X amount of snakes. So say you get 5 that live in 5 acres. I'm making this up, right? Well, then say you would have like 30 mice, okay? And then say you'd have like 1,000 grasshoppers. Well, notice how I'm going down and down and down. I'm getting more and more. Because in 5 acres, think how many blades of grass that is, okay? So how many grasshoppers can live in that 5 acres? 1,000. Well, how many mice can feed off that 1,000 grasshoppers? 20. How many snakes can feed off those 20 mice? 5. I made all those numbers up, okay? I just wanted to be able to say it. So that's why the pyramid gets smaller, because the snakes need a lot more space to get their food, so that because they lose their what they eat loses energy as heat as it goes up the food chain. That makes sense? And phytoplankton is what floats around in the ocean, and zooplankton would be what eats the phytoplankton, and then herring and sea lions. The end. Let me know if you have questions. All right. Bye.